I was 17 when I finally understood that mothers aren't supposed to teach their children how to pick locks as a bedtime story. My name is Maya, and for as long as I could remember, our house operated by different rules. Mom called it the family business, but there was nothing familial about the way she orchestrated our lives like pieces on her personal chessboard. It started when I was 7, and Tommy was 3. I remember because it was right after Dad left, or as Mom always corrected us, abandoned his family. She'd found me crying in my room one night, clutching the stuffed elephant Dad had given me for my birthday. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, sitting on my bed and stroking my hair. "Daddy left because he was weak. He couldn't handle taking care of his family. But Mommy's strong enough to take care of everyone, aren't I?" I nodded, desperate for comfort. "That's why I need you to be my special helper. You're so smart, Maya, smarter than other children your age. Can you help Mommy take care of Tommy and baby Lily?" Being called smart, being needed, it felt like a lifeline when everything else was falling apart. I would have done anything she asked. The first lesson came disguised as a game. We were at the grocery store, and she handed me a candy bar. "Maya, I want you to put this in your pocket while I distract the cashier by asking about their return policy. Can you do that for Mommy?" My stomach twisted. I knew stealing was wrong. Dad had taught me that. But Mom was watching me with such hopeful eyes, and she'd said I was special, that I could help. "But Mom, isn't that—" "Sweetheart," she interrupted, her voice still sweet, but with an edge that made my chest tight. "Do you want Tommy to have food tonight? Mommy's trying very hard to feed everyone, but money is so tight since Daddy abandoned us. Sometimes we have to bend the rules to survive." I was 7. The weight of my baby brother's hunger felt enormous on my small shoulders. I took the candy bar. "Good girl," she whispered, and the praise made me feel sick and proud at the same time. By the time I was 12, the games had evolved into elaborate operations. Tommy, now 8, had learned to cry on command, useful for creating distractions. 4-year-old Lily had a natural charm that made adults want to help her, which Mom exploited ruthlessly. "Think of it as an education," Mom would say, braiding my hair before sending me out on increasingly dangerous missions. "Other children learn useless things in school. When will you ever need to know about the Revolutionary War? But Mommy teaches you real survival skills." She had turned our kitchen table into a war room. Maps of the town were spread across the surface, marked with different colored pins. Red for high-security areas, yellow for moderate risk, green for easy targets. She'd quiz us on escape routes, security camera blind spots, and the personal habits of local shop owners. "Maya, what time does Mrs. Peterson from the pharmacy usually take her smoke break?" 2:30 p.m., every day, except Wednesdays when her nephew covers for her." "Excellent. And Tommy, if a police officer approaches you during an operation, what do you do?" "Start crying and ask for my mommy," Tommy would recite, his voice small and mechanical. "Perfect. And Lily?" 4-year-old Lily would put on her biggest smile. "I tell them I'm lost and ask them to help me find my doggy." Mom would beam at us like we just recited poetry. The worst part wasn't the crimes themselves. It was how she made us complicit in our own exploitation. She'd hold elaborate family meetings, where she'd present each job like a fun adventure. She'd bake our favorite cookies and let us stay up past bedtime, making us feel special and chosen, while she detailed how Tommy would create a distraction at the bank while Lily, barely 6 by then, would slip documents into filing cabinets during the chaos. "Remember," she'd say, her hands gentle as she tucked us into bed afterward, "other families don't understand what we have to do to survive. They have daddies who provide for them. But we're special. We're survivors. We take care of each other." She had an uncanny ability to know our thoughts before we voiced them. I started to suspect she could read minds. The first time I tried to refuse a job, I was 13 and starting to understand that what we were doing had real victims. She somehow knew before I even opened my mouth. "Maya, sweetheart," she said, not looking up from her magazine, "you're thinking of disappointing Mommy, aren't you?" I froze. I'd been practicing my refusal speech in my head all morning, standing in front of my bedroom mirror, trying to find the courage. "I can see it in your eyes, baby. You're starting to think like an outsider instead of thinking like family." Her voice was soft, hurt. "Do you know what happens to children whose families can't stay together?" She set down her magazine and turned to face me fully. "Remember what happened to the Rodriguez family down the street? Their children got taken away because the parents couldn't provide for them. Social services don't care about keeping families together. They'll split you 3 up, send you to different foster homes. Tommy and Lily would be placed with strangers who might not even be kind to them. The fear in her voice sounded so genuine. At 13, I couldn't tell the difference between manipulation and protection. Tommy would probably never see you again, she continued, tears gathering in her eyes. And Lily, she's so small, so trusting. What if they placed her with people who hurt her? What if they separated her from the only family she's ever known? My resolve crumbled. The thought of Tommy and Lily, scared and alone, calling for me in foster homes where I couldn't protect them, was unbearable. I'm sorry, Mom, I whispered. Sometimes I get scared. Oh, baby. She pulled me into her arms, and I breathed in her familiar scent of vanilla perfume and cigarettes. Of course you get scared. That just shows how smart you are. But Mommy would never let anything bad happen to you. Everything I do, everything I teach you, it's all to keep our family safe and together. That afternoon, I shoplifted jewelry worth $300, while my 8-year-old brother created a diversion by accidentally knocking over a display. I told myself I was protecting him. Period. Our first real escape attempt came when I was 16. I'd spent months planning it in secret, researching youth shelters, memorizing phone numbers, and slowly gathering the cash we'd need for bus tickets. I'd finally started to see through her manipulations, started to understand that normal families don't operate like criminal organizations. The revelation had come gradually. I'd started paying attention to my classmates' lives, noticing the little things, like how they interacted with their parents, or how they felt safe and supported at home. Conversations about their parents, how they helped with homework instead of teaching lockpicking, how they worried about grades instead of escape routes, how they celebrated birthdays instead of successful heists. But the final straw came when I watched 12-year-old Tommy teaching 8-year-old Lily how to forge signatures. No, Lily, you have to make the G loop bigger, he was saying, his voice patient and serious. Mom says attention to detail is what separates amateurs from professionals. Seeing my baby sister carefully practicing forgery while other 8-year-olds were learning to read chapter books broke something inside me. This wasn't normal. This wasn't protecting them. This was destroying their childhoods, their futures, their very souls. Started researching escape plans with the same methodical approach Mom had taught me to use for her operations. I studied bus schedules, identified youth shelters in neighboring states, and slowly began preparing my siblings for what we'd have to do. Tommy, I said one evening, while we were supposed to be doing homework, do you ever think about what it would be like to live somewhere else? His face immediately grew wary, an expression no 12-year-old should master so well. Are you thinking about leaving? Because Mom always says, I'm not talking about leaving, I interrupted quickly. I'm just curious. Don't you ever wonder what other families are like? Other families are weak, he recited automatically. They can't survive like we can. But I caught something in his eyes, a flicker of doubt, maybe even hope. Over the following weeks, I carefully planted seeds. I'd point out things when we were out in public. A father teaching his son to ride a bike instead of steal one. A mother buying her daughter school supplies instead of burglary tools. Families having fun together without any criminal agenda. Slowly, Tommy began to question. And once Tommy started questioning, it was easier to approach Lily. Lily, sweetheart, I said one day while braiding her hair. What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to help Mommy with the business, she said immediately. But what if you could be anything? A teacher, or a doctor, or a scientist? She looked confused. But Mommy says our business is more important than those jobs. What if I told you that little girls your age in other families get to go to school every day and learn about animals and colors and numbers, and they never have to worry about police or hiding or lying? Her eyes widened. Really? Really. It took 3 months of careful preparation. I'd saved $400 from various jobs, money Mom thought I was spending on teenage things, like makeup and clothes. I'd researched Safe Harbor Youth Shelter in the next state, which specialized in helping children escape dangerous family situations. I'd memorized their intake procedures, their location, and their promises of protection. Most importantly, I'd slowly been modifying our homework time to actually teach Tommy and Lily real academic skills. I'd stolen textbooks from the school library and was secretly homeschooling them in our bedroom, preparing them for the real world. The night of our escape, I waited until 2 a.m., Mom's deepest sleep cycle, something I'd observed over months. I gently woke Tommy and Lily. Remember what we talked about, I whispered as I helped them dress in layers. We're going to a place where kids are safe. where you can go to real school and make friends who don't have to lie about their families. Tommy nodded solemnly, but Lily was crying silently. "What about Mommy?" she whispered. "She'll be all alone." My heart shattered. Even after everything, after months of showing them what normal families looked like, Lily's first concern was for the woman who had stolen her childhood. "Mommy will be okay," I lied, kissing her forehead. "And maybe someday, when she learns how to be a real mommy, we can see her again." We made it 6 blocks before I realized we were being followed. At first, I thought it was paranoia, but then I caught sight of the familiar silhouette half a block behind us, moving when we moved, stopping when we stopped. My blood turned to ice. How had she known? I'd been so careful. We reached the bus station just as the 3:47 a.m. Greyhound to Jacksonville was boarding. I had our tickets clutched in my sweaty palm, and for a moment, I thought we'd made it. Then I heard her voice. "My babies, oh thank God you're safe." I turned to see Mom running toward us, tears streaming down her face, her bathrobe flying behind her like wings. "When I woke up and found the house empty, I thought someone had kidnapped you," she sobbed, loud enough for everyone in the station to hear. The concerned looks from strangers burned into me as she embraced us. A security guard approached, his expression kind but suspicious. "Everything all right here, ma'am?" "Yes, officer, thank you so much," Mom said, her voice shaking with relief. "My oldest daughter has been having some episodes lately. The doctor thinks it might be early onset bipolar disorder. She sometimes gets these ideas in her head and convinces her younger siblings to go along with her plans." I stared at her in horror. The lie was so smooth, so believable, complete with just enough medical terminology to sound credible. "Maya, honey," she continued, turning to me with eyes full of fake concern. "You're not thinking clearly right now. Remember what Dr. Patterson said about these episodes? You promised you'd wake Mommy up if you started feeling confused again." "I'm not confused," I said desperately, but even to my own ears, my voice sounded young and uncertain. "Of course you don't think you're confused, sweetheart. That's part of the condition." She looked back at the security guard apologetically. "I'm so sorry for the disturbance. I should have hidden the household money better. When she gets like this, she sometimes takes things without realizing." The security guard's expression had shifted from concern to sympathy. For her, not for us. "You 3 better go home with your mother," he said gently. "She was worried sick about you." As she guided us back to the car, her hand firm on my shoulder, she whispered in my ear, "How did you find us?" She smiled, and for a moment, her mask slipped entirely. "Mothers always know, Maya. I have my ways." Later, I discovered the tracking app she'd installed on the phone she'd generously given me for emergencies. But that night, all I could think about was how easily she'd convinced a stranger that I was mentally ill, how quickly she'd turned my rescue attempt into evidence of my instability. That night, as she tucked me into bed like nothing had happened, she whispered, "I know you think you're trying to help Tommy and Lily, sweetheart, but running away would have destroyed them. Out there, they'd be victims. Here, with Mommy, they're survivors. Can you understand the difference?" I couldn't answer. I was too busy wondering if maybe she was right. The second attempt came 8 months later, when I was almost 17. I'd spent those months observing her patterns more carefully, documenting her methods, learning to think like she did, while fighting to maintain my own moral compass. The breakthrough came when I realized that Mom's greatest strength, her ability to manipulate systems and people, was also her weakness. She was so confident in her ability to control situations that she'd become predictable. I started leaving subtle evidence of my planning where I knew she'd find it. Fake bus schedules with the wrong dates, notes about shelters in cities we'd never go to, conversations with fictional friends about escape plans that led nowhere. I wanted her to think she knew what I was planning, while I executed something completely different. The real plan was more sophisticated. Instead of trying to disappear with Tommy and Lily, I'd arranged to turn ourselves in. But to the right person, under the right circumstances, with the right evidence. Mrs. Davidson, my AP English teacher, had been asking concerned questions about my family situation for months. I deflected them carefully, but I'd been watching her, studying her. She was one of those teachers who actually cared, who stayed after school to help struggling students, who kept granola bars in her desk for kids who didn't have lunch money. More importantly, her brother-in-law was a social worker who specialized in family trafficking cases, information I discovered through careful research. I spent 2 months building a relationship with Mrs. Davidson, slowly revealing pieces of our situation. Not enough to trigger immediate intervention, but enough to establish credibility for when I made my real move. "Maya," she said one afternoon after class. I want you to know that you can talk to me about anything. Sometimes students have complicated home situations, and there are people who can help. What kind of help? I asked carefully. People who understand that sometimes families need support to be healthy. People who prioritize keeping children safe while keeping families together whenever possible. That phrase, keeping families together whenever possible, was key. Mom's greatest weapon against us was our fear of separation. If I could find a way to keep us together while getting us away from her, I might be able to convince Tommy and Lily to cooperate. The plan required perfect timing. I arranged to meet Mrs. Davidson's brother-in-law, David Chen, at the school on a Friday afternoon when Mom thought I was in detention. Tommy and Lily were supposed to be at their after-school program, a rare 3 hours when Mom's surveillance was relaxed because she trusted the controlled environment. Instead, I picked them up early with a forged note and brought them to the meeting. Mr. Chen, I said, as we sat in Mrs. Davidson's empty classroom, I need to show you something. I pulled out a composition notebook, the same kind Mom used for planning operations. Over the past months, I'd been documenting everything. Dates, times, locations of crimes. Photographs taken with the school's digital camera during photography club. Recordings made on the ancient tape recorder I'd found at a garage sale. This is our life, I said simply. Mr. Chen spent 40 minutes reviewing the evidence, while Tommy and Lily sat quietly beside me. I'd prepared them for this conversation, but seeing it through their eyes, watching a stranger examine the documentation of our abuse, made it feel even more surreal. Maya, Mr. Chen said finally, his voice gentle but serious, this is extensive evidence of criminal child endangerment. We can help you, but you understand that your mother will be arrested? I nodded. Will we be split up? Not if I can help it. You're 17. In some circumstances, you might be able to serve as a guardian for your siblings while we sort out a permanent placement. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe. He arranged for us to spend the weekend at a specialized safe house for trafficking victims, a place that looked like a normal family home, but was actually run by trained counselors and protected by security measures Mom would never be able to breach. We made it 18 hours. I woke up on Saturday morning to find Mom sitting in the kitchen of the safe house, drinking coffee with the night supervisor. Pa, good morning, sweetheart, she said, as if nothing unusual was happening. I hope you slept well. The supervisor, a kind-looking woman named Janet, smiled at me sympathetically. Maya, honey, your mother explained about your condition. We had no idea when we accepted your case that there were medical complications. My blood turned to ice. What? Mom stood and approached me slowly, her expression full of loving concern. Patterson called me yesterday evening. He said you'd missed your medication appointment on Thursday and that your behavior might become erratic if you went too long without treatment. She produced a bottle of prescription medication with my name on it. He was very concerned when I told him about this latest episode. I stared at the bottle. The label looked completely legitimate, correct pharmacy, correct doctor's name, correct date. But I'd never seen it before in my life. I don't take medication, I said weakly. Oh, honey, Mom said, her voice full of patient sadness. That's exactly what Dr. Patterson said you'd say. Anosognosia, the inability to recognize your own illness. It's very common in cases like yours. She turned to Janet, the social worker who placed them here yesterday. I'm sure he meant well, but he didn't have access to Maya's complete medical records. If he had, he would have known that she sometimes experiences elaborate delusions where she believes her family is involved in criminal activity. Janet's expression had shifted from sympathy to professional concern. Mrs. Rodriguez, you should have informed us about your daughter's psychiatric condition when we accepted the case. I tried to, Mom said, producing more documents from her purse, but the young man seemed convinced that Maya was telling the truth about some very disturbing fantasies. I didn't want to argue with him in front of the children. It would have been traumatic for them to hear their sister's illness discussed so clinically. She handed Janet a thick folder. These are her complete medical records going back 3 years. You'll see the pattern of episodes, the previous hospitalizations, the detailed treatment plan. I grabbed the folder from Janet's hands and flipped through it frantically. Hospital intake forms from 3 different facilities, psychiatric evaluations describing elaborate paranoid delusions, medication charts showing a history of non-compliance, progress notes documenting my improvement when properly medicated. All fake, all perfectly crafted, all bearing official letterheads and signatures that would fool any casual inspection. You see, Mom continued gently, Maya is very intelligent. Her illness doesn't affect her cognitive abilities at all. In fact, it sometimes makes her more creative and convincing when she's in the middle of an episode. She can fabricate extremely detailed stories that seem completely believable. Janet was nodding slowly, reading over the documents. And your younger children, do they show similar symptoms? Not yet, thank goodness, but Maya sometimes convinces them to go along with her fantasies. It's actually quite common in families dealing with adolescent psychiatric disorders. The siblings can get caught up in the delusions, period. I watched Tommy and Lily sitting at the kitchen table, eating cereal and looking confused but not alarmed. They trusted Mom completely. Even after everything I'd shown them, everything I'd taught them, they couldn't see through her performance because she was still their mother, period. I think it would be best if we transferred Maya to a more appropriate facility, Janet was saying. Somewhere equipped to handle psychiatric emergencies, period. Actually, Mom replied, Dr. Patterson is on his way. He feels that being in an unfamiliar environment might escalate Maya's episode. He's arranged for a psychiatric nurse to stay with us at home for a few days while we adjust her medications, period. Within an hour, we were back in Mom's car. She'd produced business cards for Dr. Patterson, authorization forms for medical transport, and even a prescription for emergency psychiatric intervention that allowed her to take me home for supervised care. As we drove, she met my eyes in the rearview mirror. You almost fooled them, sweetheart, she said, her voice full of genuine pride. The documentation you put together was quite impressive. You're learning to think strategically, to anticipate opposition, to prepare for multiple contingencies. I'm very proud of how much you've grown. The compliment made me feel sick. But, she continued, you still have so much to learn about the real world. Adults don't want to believe that children are capable of the things we do. They want to believe that families are safe, that parents protect their children, that the system works. When you force them to confront evidence that challenges those beliefs, they'll look for any explanation that allows them to avoid the uncomfortable truth. She pulled into our driveway and turned to face me directly. I didn't have to convince them you were lying, Maya. I just had to give them a reason to believe that you weren't telling the truth. There's a difference. That night, as she tucked me into bed, she whispered, You can't outsmart someone who taught you everything you know, sweetheart. But I'm proud of you for trying. It shows you're learning. The third attempt happened 6 months later and failed before it even began. I'd learned from my previous mistakes and decided to work entirely within the system. Instead of trying to prove Mom was a criminal, I focus on getting help for myself and my siblings as victims. I'd been meeting secretly with the school guidance counselor, Miss Rodriguez, for weeks. She'd helped me understand the difference between criminal prosecution and child protection, and assured me that sometimes kids could get help even when there wasn't enough evidence to arrest their parents. Maya, she said during one of our sessions, I want you to know that there are options. Even if we can't prove criminal activity, if children are in an unsafe environment, there are ways to provide support and intervention. She'd helped me contact a specialized program that provided temporary housing and counseling for at-risk youth. The plan was simple. On Monday morning, I'd bring Tommy and Lily to school as usual, but instead of going to class, we'd meet with a team of social workers who would evaluate our situation and provide immediate protection. Sunday night, I couldn't sleep. I kept rehearsing what I'd say, how I'd explain our situation, how I'd convince Tommy and Lily to trust the social workers. I was terrified but hopeful. This plan felt different, more solid, more likely to succeed. Monday morning, I woke up to find Ms. Rodriguez sitting at our kitchen table with Mom. Good morning, Maya, Ms. Rodriguez said, but her voice was different, formal, professional, distant. Mom poured me a glass of orange juice and smiled. Ms. Rodriguez came by to discuss some concerns about your behavior at school. My stomach dropped. What concerns? Ms. Rodriguez opened a folder. Maya, there have been several reports from your teachers about disturbing creative writing assignments, inappropriate questions during class discussions, and what appears to be attention-seeking behavior. She pulled out papers I recognized, essays I'd written for English class, discussion posts from social studies, even art projects from earlier in the year. But seeing them compiled together, out of context, they looked different, disturbing. Your mother and I have been discussing the possibility that you might benefit from some additional support, Ms. Rodriguez continued. Sometimes teenagers act out when they're struggling with mental health issues or family stress. Family stress? I repeated weakly. Mom reached over and squeezed my hand. Sweetheart, I know it's been hard since your father left, and I know I've had to work more hours to keep us afloat financially. Sometimes when parents are struggling, kids create dramatic stories to get attention. Miss Rodriguez nodded sympathetically. Your mother mentioned that you've been having some challenges with distinguishing between fantasy and reality. She's very concerned about you. I looked back and forth between them, feeling like I was drowning. Miss Rodriguez, you know what I told you. You know about… Maya, she interrupted gently. Sometimes when we're struggling emotionally, our minds can create very convincing stories that feel completely real to us. But that doesn't mean they actually happened. What about the evidence I showed you, the documentation? Mom and Miss Rodriguez exchanged a look. Honey, Mom said carefully, you showed Miss Rodriguez some creative writing projects and some photographs you'd staged for your photography class. She was concerned about the violent themes in your work, but she also recognized that you have a very active imagination. Miss Rodriguez pulled out more papers, my evidence folder, but reframed. My documentation of crimes became creative writing exercises. My secretly recorded conversations became audio drama projects for speech class. My photographs of criminal activity became artistic representations of urban decay. The good news, Miss Rodriguez continued, is that this kind of creativity and intelligence can be channeled in healthy ways. Your mother and I have arranged for you to begin seeing a counselor who specializes in helping gifted teenagers work through emotional difficulties. And, Mom added, I've decided to cut back on my work hours so I can spend more time at home with all of you. I think some of your concerns come from feeling like the family isn't stable enough. That afternoon, I found out that Miss Rodriguez had been transferred to a different school district. The counselor I'd confided in had accepted a position in another state. The teacher who'd started asking questions about our home life had been reassigned to teach summer school across town. Transitions can be difficult, Mom explained, as she cooked dinner that night. But sometimes, when people get too involved in family business that doesn't concern them, it's better for everyone as they find new opportunities elsewhere. She hummed while she stirred the pasta sauce, completely relaxed. The world is full of people who will disappoint you, Maya, she said, without looking up. People who seem helpful at first, but then abandon you when things get complicated. But family never abandons family, remember that. By 17, I'd learned to think like her, not because I wanted to, but because survival demanded it. I studied her methods, not to emulate them, but to anticipate them. I watched how she manipulated situations, how she read people, how she always stayed 3 steps ahead. And then I realized something crucial. She'd taught me too well. Every failed escape attempt had been a lesson, not just in how to be more careful, more thorough, more strategic, but in how she operated. I'd been studying the master manipulator at close range for years, learning her techniques through painful trial and error. She controlled us through our love for each other and our fear of separation. She controlled outside adults through their desire to believe in family stability and their reluctance to confront uncomfortable truths. She controlled systems by exploiting their weaknesses, the gaps between departments, the assumptions built into procedures, the human tendency to take official-looking documents at face value. But she had weaknesses too. They were harder to see because they were woven into her strengths, but they were there. Her need to be seen as a perfect mother was one. Her pride in our education was another. Her assumption that she was always the smartest person in any situation was a third. Most importantly, she'd become comfortable with her own success. After 3 failed escape attempts, she was confident that she'd broken me, that I'd learned my lesson, that I'd given up. She was wrong. The final escape began with surrender. I stopped fighting her openly, stopped showing resistance. Instead, I became the perfect daughter, eager to please, grateful for her lessons, enthusiastic about our family business. Mom, I said one morning as she planned our next operation, I've been thinking about what you said, about learning to think strategically. She looked up from her maps, pleased. Oh? I think my problem before was that I was still thinking like a child. I was focused on running away, instead of thinking about what was best for the family. Her smile was brilliant. Go on. Well, I realized that everything you've taught us, it's not just about survival, is it? It's about being smart enough to see opportunities that other people miss. It's about being strong enough to do what needs to be done. Exactly, sweetheart. For 3 months, I played the role flawlessly. I praised her intelligence, thanked her for teaching us skills other kids didn't have, and even suggested new targets for our operations. Maya came up with the idea for the utility company scam. She bragged to Tommy and Lily one evening. She's really starting to understand how to think creatively about problem solving. The words made me sick. But I smiled and hugged her tight. I learned from the best. I said, and meant it in a way she didn't understand. During this time, I was actually building something she couldn't see, but I was doing it using her own methods. She taught me that documentation was power. So I began secretly recording our family meetings, using equipment I'd stolen during our operations. She taught me that multiple contingency plans were essential, so I created backup routes and safe houses she didn't know about. She taught me that manipulation worked best when the target didn't realize they were being manipulated, so I planted ideas in her head that she thought were her own. But most importantly, I realized that all my previous escape attempts had failed because I'd been trying to fight her system instead of using it. The breakthrough came when I understood that she controlled us by making us need her, for protection, for survival, for family identity. But what if I could make her need me? Mom, I said one evening after a particularly successful operation. I've been thinking about our long-term strategy. Long-term strategy? Well, Tommy's getting older. Lily's starting to ask more questions. And I'll be 18 soon, which means I'll be legally independent. I saw a flicker of concern cross her face. I don't want to be independent from the family, I continued quickly. But I was thinking, what if instead of just surviving, we started building something bigger? Her interest was piqued. What did you have in mind? What if we used everything you've taught us to create a real business, something legitimate on the surface, but with our skills underneath? We could train other kids whose families are struggling, teach them what you've taught us. The idea appealed to her on multiple levels. It would expand her influence, validate her methods, and most importantly, ensure that I remained dependent on her instead of leaving when I turned 18. That's actually quite brilliant, Maya. Over the following weeks, I fed her more details about this fictional plan. We'd start a youth mentorship program that would actually be a training ground for young criminals. We'd identify vulnerable families and recruit children whose parents were desperate enough to look the other way. We'd create a network of graduates who could execute operations across multiple states. You'd be like the CEO of a criminal empire, I told her, and watched her eyes light up with ambition. The plan required careful research into properties, business licenses, and recruitment strategies. Most importantly, it required her to be present at meetings with potential investors who could provide the startup capital for our expansion. What she didn't know was that these investors were actually FBI agents I'd been in contact with for months. Getting connected to federal law enforcement had taken extraordinary patience and planning. Local authorities were too easily manipulated, as I'd learned from previous attempts. But federal agencies had different procedures, different safeguards, different priorities. I'd started by researching online crime reporting systems, looking for ways to provide information anonymously while building credibility over time. Through a series of careful communications, I'd established myself as a reliable informant who could provide evidence of interstate criminal activity involving minors. Agent Sarah Chen, no relation to the social worker from my second escape attempt, became my primary contact. Our relationship developed over months of careful information sharing. I'd provide details about our operations after they were completed, when it was too late for intervention but useful for building a larger case. Maya, she said during one of our encrypted phone conversations, we have enough evidence to arrest your mother right now. You don't have to put yourself at additional risk. Yes, I do, I replied. If you arrest her based on the evidence I've provided, she'll claim it was all fabricated, that I'm mentally ill, that she's being framed. You've seen how good she is at manipulating systems. I need her to incriminate herself in a way that can't be explained away. The meeting was set for a Wednesday evening at an upscale hotel conference room. Mom had spent weeks preparing her presentation, creating professional-looking materials that outlined our expansion plan, while carefully avoiding explicit criminal language. She thought she was meeting with 3 potential investors, wealthy individuals interested in funding alternative education programs for at-risk youth. She'd practiced her pitch until it was perfect, balancing just enough criminal implication to intrigue people who might be interested in illegal ventures, while maintaining enough plausible deniability to avoid immediate prosecution. Maya, I want you to present the section about recruitment strategies, she said as we prepared for the meeting. You understand the psychology of vulnerable families better than anyone. That evening, as she laid out her plans for expanding criminal training to dozens of children across multiple states, she had no idea that every word was being recorded by federal agents. The beauty of working with children, she explained to the undercover agents, is that they're naturally adaptable. Adults get set in their ways. But kids, especially kids from broken homes, they're grateful for structure, for someone who believes in them. She clicked to the next slide in her presentation. Maya here has developed some fascinating insights into identifying the most promising candidates. I took a breath and delivered the lines we'd practiced, knowing that each word was building an unshakable case against her. The key is finding families where the parents are already overwhelmed, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. Single mothers working multiple jobs, families dealing with financial crisis, kids who are already falling through the cracks at school. They're the ones most likely to see our program as an opportunity rather than exploitation. One of the agents, posing as a businessman named Frank, leaned forward with interest. And these children, they're willing participants? Mom's smile was radiant. That's the genius of the approach Maya and I have developed. We don't force anything. We simply provide education and opportunities that the traditional system denies them. These kids learn practical skills, develop confidence, and most importantly, they learn to take care of their families. Can you be more specific about these practical skills? Another agent asked. Of course, Mom replied, pulling out a detailed curriculum she'd spent weeks developing. Phase 1 focuses on observation and social engineering, teaching kids to read people, to identify vulnerabilities, to build trust with targets. Phase 2 covers technical skills, lock manipulation, basic electronics, document analysis. Phase 3 is practical application, supervised fieldwork where they can practice what they've learned in real-world scenarios. She was proud of that curriculum. I could see it in her face as she walked them through each module, explaining how she designed it to build skills progressively while maintaining plausible deniability. For example, she continued, in our urban exploration module, children learn to assess building security, identify entry and exit points, and move through spaces undetected. Officially, it's an adventure program that builds confidence and problem-solving skills. Practically, it's advanced reconnaissance training. The agents asked detailed questions, and Mom answered each one enthusiastically. She explained how she'd recruit children, how she'd manage their parents, how she'd structure operations to minimize risk while maximizing profit. The children actually enjoy the work, she said at one point. It makes them feel special, valued, part of something important. Traditional education tells these kids they're failures, that they'll never amount to anything. We show them they're capable of extraordinary things. And if a child wants to leave the program? Agent Chen asked. Mom's expression grew thoughtful. Well, that's where family psychology becomes important. These children develop deep emotional bonds with their teams, their mentors, their sense of purpose. Leaving would mean abandoning the only family that's ever truly understood them. But hypothetically, Agent Chen pressed, if a child did try to leave, it's never been a problem, Mom replied smoothly. But if it became one, there are ways to help a confused child understand what's really in their best interest. Sometimes young people go through phases where they think they want conventional lives, but they usually come to their senses once they realize how empty and meaningless the normal world really is. She clicked to a slide titled, Family Integration Strategies. The key is making sure the children understand that their success is tied to their family's well-being. When everyone succeeds together, everyone stays together. After 90 minutes, the meeting concluded with promises to review the proposal and discuss next steps. Mom was glowing with satisfaction as we drove home. Maya, that was perfect, she said. Did you see how impressed they were with our methodology? I think Frank was particularly interested in the psychological aspects. Do you think they'll invest? I asked. I think they'd be crazy not to. What we've developed is revolutionary, a systematic approach to unlocking human potential that completely bypasses the limitations of conventional education and morality. That night, she celebrated by making our favorite dinner and letting us stay up late watching movies. She was happier than I'd seen her in years, energized by the prospect of expanding her influence, of proving that her methods could be scaled up and professionalized. You know what the best part is? She said as she tucked me into bed. This means our family will never have to worry about being separated. When we're running a legitimate business, even if it has unconventional elements, no one can question our family structure. We'll be untouchable. 3 days later, at 6:47 a.m. on a Saturday morning, federal agents executed simultaneous search warrants on our house, Mom's storage units, and the various safe houses she'd established around the city. I woke up to the sound of doors being broken down and official voices shouting identification. For a moment, I thought it was another nightmare. I'd been having them for months as the stress of the final plan took its toll. Then I saw Mom's face. Period. She was standing in the doorway of my bedroom, still in her pajamas, but her expression wasn't confused or frightened. It was calculating, already working through explanations and escape routes. "Stay calm," she whispered to me as agents thundered up the stairs. "Remember, we're victims of an elaborate frame job. Maya, your mental health issues have made you susceptible to outside manipulation." Even then, even with federal agents in our house with evidence of everything she'd done, she was still trying to manipulate the situation. But this time was different. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Agent Chen said as she entered my bedroom, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit interstate crimes involving minors, child endangerment, and running a continuing criminal enterprise." Mom's face went pale as Agent Chen continued reading her rights. For the first time in my life, I saw her look genuinely shocked. "There's been a mistake," she said, her voice shaky, but still trying to project confidence. "My daughter has been receiving psychiatric treatment for delusional episodes. Someone has clearly taken advantage of her condition to fabricate evidence against me." Agent Chen looked at her calmly. "Ma'am, we have recordings of you describing your criminal training program in detail, outlining plans to expand operations across multiple states, and explicitly discussing methods for coercing children to participate in illegal activities. Those recordings are from a business meeting about a youth mentorship program. If someone has edited them to sound criminal—" "Mrs. Rodriguez," Agent Chen interrupted, "we have 3 hours of unedited audio and video of you enthusiastically detailing plans to train dozens of children in criminal techniques. You're also being charged based on evidence of crimes you've already committed with your own children over a period of several years." Mom's eyes found mine across the room, and in that moment, I saw her understand. "Maya," she whispered, her voice full of betrayal and something that might have been hurt, "what did you do?" "I saved us," I replied. As they led her out in handcuffs, she kept trying to catch my eye, continued trying to mouth instructions about what to say, how to behave, how to minimize the damage. But for the first time in 10 years, I wasn't listening. Agent Chen knelt down beside my bed. "Maya, you're safe now. You and your siblings will be placed with a specialized foster family that understands what you've been through." "Together?" I asked, my voice smaller than I'd intended. "Together," she confirmed. The trial lasted 6 months. Mom's defense team tried every strategy she'd taught me to expect. They claimed I was mentally ill, that the evidence was fabricated, that she was the victim of an elaborate conspiracy. They brought in expert witnesses to testify about false memory syndrome, teenage attention-seeking behavior, and the unreliability of child witnesses. But the evidence was overwhelming. Beyond the recordings from the final meeting, investigators had uncovered a decade's worth of documentation. Bank records showing profits from criminal activities, storage units full of stolen goods and forged documents, testimony from dozens of victims whose homes we'd robbed or whose identities we'd stolen. Most damning were the recordings I'd made over the previous months. Hours of family meetings where Mon had detailed our operations, praised us for successful crimes, and outlined plans for future targets. During her testimony, she tried one last manipulation. She looked directly at me from the witness stand, tears in her eyes, and said, "I did everything I could to keep my family together after their father abandoned us. Yes, I made mistakes. I was desperate, overwhelmed, trying to survive as a single mother. But everything I did was to protect my children, to teach them to be strong and self-reliant." For a moment, listening to her voice break as she talked about her love for us, I felt the old pull of guilt and confusion. She sounded so sincere, so hurt, so much like the mother who had tucked me in every night and told me how special I was. But then I remembered 8-year-old Lily practicing forgery. I remembered 12-year-old Tommy teaching our baby sister to lie to police officers. I remembered my own childhood, stolen piece by piece in the name of family survival. The jury convicted her on all counts. She was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. As they led her away after sentencing, she mouthed one last message to me. "I'm proud of you." Even then, even at the very end, she couldn't resist trying to make me complicit in my own trauma. We're safe now, living with the Morrison family in Oregon, a couple who specialize in fostering children from trafficking situations. David and Sarah Morrison understand that we're not typical foster kids, that we need specialized support to learn how to live normal lives. The transition hasn't been easy. For months, Tommy jumped every time the doorbell rang, convinced that Mom had somehow escaped prison and tracked us down. Lily had nightmares about being separated from us and placed with strangers who would hurt her. And I struggled with a guilt so deep it felt like it was carved into my bones. Guilt for destroying the only family we'd ever known. Guilt for sending our mother to prison. Guilt for the relief I felt at finally being safe. Maya, Sarah Morrison said one evening as I sat at the kitchen table, struggling through a trigonometry assignment. Real homework, for the first time in my life. You know that none of this was your fault, right? I know, I replied automatically, the same response I'd been giving therapists for months. Do you really know, or do you just know you're supposed to say that? I looked up at her. Sarah had a way of asking questions that cut through all my carefully constructed defenses. Sometimes I feel like I betrayed her, I admitted. Like maybe I could have found another way, a way that didn't destroy everything. And sometimes you miss her. It wasn't a question. Sarah understood that love doesn't disappear just because someone hurts you, that the relationship between an abusive parent and their child is complicated in ways that outsiders can't fully grasp. She wasn't all bad, I said quietly. She taught us to be strong, to think strategically, to never give up. She told us every day that we were special, that we were capable of extraordinary things. She was right about that, Sarah replied. You are capable of extraordinary things. The problem wasn't her belief in your abilities, it was how she chose to use them. Tommy is learning to use his intelligence for school projects instead of cons. He's in advanced mathematics now and talks about becoming an engineer. Sometimes I catch him calculating angles and trajectories, and for a moment, I worry that he's planning something criminal. But then I realize he's just figuring out how to build a better bridge for his physics class. Lily is discovering that her natural charm doesn't have to be weaponized. She's made friends at school, real friends, not targets or accomplices. She's learning to be kind because she wants to be, not because kindness is a useful tool for manipulation. Last month, she played a tree in the school play, and seeing her on stage just being a normal 10-year-old was the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. And I'm learning that the strategic thinking Mom taught me can be channeled into legitimate pursuits. I'm studying criminal justice now, with plans to specialize in crimes against children. I want to help other kids in situations like ours, to be the person who listens when they try to tell their stories. The skills Mom taught me, reading people, planning contingencies, staying calm under pressure, thinking several steps ahead, they're actually valuable in legal contexts. I'm good at analyzing case files, at spotting inconsistencies in testimony, at understanding the psychology of both victims and perpetrators. My professors don't know about my background, but they've commented on my unusual insight into criminal behavior and my ability to think like both a victim and an investigator. Maya, my criminology professor said after class last week, have you considered specializing in family trafficking cases? You seem to have an intuitive understanding of how these operations work. If only she knew. 2 years after her sentencing, Mom requested a visit. The letter came through our victim services coordinator, along with assurances that I was under no obligation to see her. It might provide closure, the coordinator suggested. Or it might be re-traumatizing. Only you can decide what's best for your healing process. I stared at the letter for 3 weeks before opening it. When I finally read it, her familiar handwriting made my chest tight with emotions I couldn't untangle. My dearest Maya, I hope this letter finds you well and thriving. I think about you and Tommy and Lily every day, and I'm so proud of how strong and resilient you've become. I know you're probably angry with me, and I understand why. I made mistakes, serious mistakes that hurt our family. But I hope someday you'll be able to understand that everything I did came from a place of love and desperation. The world failed us after your father left. The system abandoned us, forced us to survive by our own means. I taught you the skills I thought you needed to survive in a world that doesn't protect people like us. I've been participating in therapy programs here, learning better ways to handle stress and trauma. I'm not the same person I was when I was arrested. I've gained insight into how my own childhood experiences shaped my parenting choices. I would love to see you, if you're willing. Not to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that yet, but to tell you how sorry I am, and how proud I am of the person you've become. You always were the smartest of my children. I should have trusted you to find better solutions than the ones I provided. All my love, Mom. Reading it, I could hear her voice, could picture her sitting in her prison cell, carefully crafting each word for maximum emotional impact. Even from behind bars, even after everything that had happened, she was still trying to manipulate me. But I also heard something else, a note of genuine sadness, maybe even genuine regret. The therapy she mentioned might actually be helping her understand what she'd done to us. He sounded like the 8-year-old who used to crawl into my bed after nightmares. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to. Part of me needs to see her face when I tell her how much she hurt us. But part of me is afraid that seeing her will undo all the progress I've made. What kind of progress? Lily asked. At 12, she was becoming beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with manipulation. Her smile was genuine now, her laughter unforced. Learning to trust people? Learning that not every conversation is a negotiation? Learning that love doesn't have to come with conditions. We talked about it as a family, the three of us and the Morrisons. In the end, I decided to go, but with conditions. I would meet with Mom for 1 hour in a supervised setting with a therapist present. I would tell her what I needed to say, and then I would leave. I wouldn't let her turn it into another manipulation. The prison visiting room was exactly what I'd expected. Sterile, institutional, designed to prevent both intimacy and violence. When they brought her in, I was shocked by how small she looked. Prison had aged her, thinned her, taken away the commanding presence that had dominated my childhood. But when she smiled at me, I was 17 again, desperate for her approval. "Maya, sweetheart," she said, her voice exactly the same. "You look so grown up, so beautiful. I've missed you so much." For a moment, I couldn't speak. All the words I'd planned, all the speeches I'd practiced, seemed to evaporate. "How are Tommy and Lily?" she continued. "Are they doing well in school? Are they happy?" "They're safe," I said finally. "They're learning what it's like to be normal kids." Her smile flickered slightly. "Normal is overrated, Maya. You know that. Normal kids don't have the skills you three have. The resilience, the ability to adapt and overcome." And there it was. The same justification, the same framework she'd always used to explain away our trauma. "Mom," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "normal kids don't have to learn to lie to police officers when they're 8 years old. Normal kids don't have nightmares about their mother being arrested. Normal kids get to be children." She leaned forward slightly, her expression earnest. "I know it was hard sometimes, sweetheart, but look at what you accomplished. You're in college. You're studying criminal justice. You're going to help other families in crisis. Would you have developed those capabilities if I'd raised you to be conventional?" The question hit me like a physical blow because part of me had wondered the same thing. Would I be as strong, as capable, as determined to help others if I'd had a normal childhood? Maybe not, I admitted, but I also wouldn't have spent years planning escape routes from my own mother. I wouldn't have had to choose between protecting my siblings and protecting myself. I wouldn't have had to send my own mother to prison to keep my family safe. Her face crumpled slightly, and for a moment, I saw genuine pain there. "Maya, I never wanted," she started, then stopped. "I was trying to protect you. The world is dangerous, especially for people without resources. I thought if I made you strong enough, smart enough, you'd never be victims. Instead, you made us victims of you." The words hung in the air between us. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw her considering her next move, her next angle, her next manipulation. Then something shifted in her expression. "You're right," she said quietly. "I told myself I was protecting you, but I was using you. I told myself I was teaching you to be strong, but I was stealing your childhood. I told myself I was keeping our family together, but I was destroying it from the inside." I hadn't expected that. In all my preparations for this meeting, I hadn't considered the possibility that she might actually acknowledge what she'd done without trying to justify it. "The therapy here has been difficult," she continued, "facing what I did, understanding how my own trauma shaped my choices, recognizing that good intentions don't erase harmful actions." She looked down at her hands, folded on the table between us. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Maya. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. But I need you to know that I understand now. What I did to you and Tommy and Lily was wrong, no matter why I did it. For the first time in my life." My mother wasn't trying to convince me of anything. She wasn't performing, wasn't strategizing, wasn't working an angle. She was just sorry. "Thank you," I said finally, "for saying that, for meaning it. I love you, Maya. I love all three of you. And because I love you, I'm not going to ask you to visit again, or to write, or to forgive me. I'm going to let you heal, and build normal lives, and be the people you were meant to be before I damaged you." The hour was almost up. Soon they'd take her back to her cell, and I'd drive home to Oregon, to the Morrisons, to my real life. "Maya," she said as the guard approached our table, "there's one more thing I need to tell you." I waited. I am proud of you. Not because you learned my lessons or because you executed the perfect plan to escape. I'm proud of you because you chose to protect Tommy and Lily instead of protecting me. You chose what was right over what was easy. You chose their future over our past. She paused, her eyes bright with unshed tears. That's the person you were always meant to be. I just wish I'd been the mother you deserved, so you could have discovered it in a different way. As they led her away, she didn't look back. For the first time in my life, my mother let me go without trying to pull me back into her orbit. That was 2 years ago. I'm 21 now, in my senior year of college, preparing for graduate school in clinical psychology, with a specialization in trauma and family systems. Tommy is 17 and has been accepted to MIT for engineering. Lily is 14 and wants to be a teacher. She says she wants to help kids feel safe and valued without asking them to do anything dangerous in return. We still live with the Morrisons, though legally we're not foster children anymore. We've become family in the truest sense, people who choose to support each other not because they have to, but because they want to. Sometimes I catch myself using the skills Mom taught me. When I'm working on complex case studies, I find myself thinking several steps ahead, anticipating complications, planning contingencies. When I'm interviewing trauma survivors, I use the people-reading abilities she drilled into me to understand what they're really saying beneath their words. The difference is my motivation. She taught me these skills to serve her purposes. I use them to protect people, to heal families, to prevent other children from experiencing what we went through. Last month, I got a letter from a teenager in Nevada whose situation reminded me of our own. She'd read about our case in a criminal justice textbook and had tracked down my contact information through the Victim Services Program. Maya, she wrote, I don't know if you'll read this, but I had to try. My mom runs cons using me and my younger brother. I've tried to get help twice, but she always convinces people that I'm lying. I don't know how to get us out, but I thought maybe someone who survived something similar might have advice. I spent 3 hours crafting my response, sharing resources, providing contact information for agencies that specialize in family trafficking cases, and most importantly, assuring her that escape was possible even when it seemed hopeless. 2 weeks later, she and her brother were placed in protective custody. Their mother was arrested based on evidence the girl had collected using techniques I'd suggested. Techniques I'd learned from Mom, repurposed for liberation instead of exploitation. The irony isn't lost on me. The woman who taught me to be a criminal gave me the skills I needed to become someone who stops criminals. The mother who stole my childhood gave me the strength I needed to help other children reclaim theirs. I think about her sometimes, sitting in her prison cell, working through her own trauma in therapy. I wonder if she understands that the most important lesson she ever taught me was unintentional, that love without respect, protection without freedom, and family without choice aren't really love, protection, or family at all. I don't hate her anymore. Hate requires too much energy, and I need that energy for building the life she never gave me permission to want. Sometimes Tommy asks if I think she'll ever get out, if she'll try to find us again. Lily wonders if she's really changed, or if this is just another long-term manipulation. I tell them the truth. I don't know. But I also tell them that it doesn't matter, because we're not the same people she trained to be extensions of her will. We're individuals with our own goals, our own relationships, our own understanding of right and wrong. She made us strong, but she didn't make us hers. And in the end, that strength, the real strength, not the criminal skills, but the emotional resilience, the strategic thinking, the absolute refusal to give up, that strength belongs to us now. We survived her love. Now we're learning to thrive without it. The House of Shadows where we grew up is gone, sold by the federal government to pay restitution to her victims. In its place, we built something she never taught us to want. A home where safety doesn't require secrecy, where love doesn't demand loyalty to harmful systems, where family means protecting each other's dreams instead of exploiting each other's vulnerabilities. She taught us that the world was dangerous, that only family could be trusted, that survival required constant vigilance and strategic thinking. She was right about the strategic thinking part, but she was wrong about almost everything else. The world can be dangerous, but it's also full of people like the Morrisons, like Agent Chen, like the teachers and counselors and social workers who dedicate their lives to protecting children. Family can be trusted, but real family, the kind that chooses your well-being over their own convenience, your future over their immediate needs. And survival doesn't require living in the shadows. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is step into the light and trust that there are people waiting there to help you build something better than what you're leaving behind. I still carry the tools she gave me. I always will. But now, I use them to construct instead of destruct, to heal instead of harm, to liberate instead of control. In the end, I suppose that's the most complete victory possible, taking everything she taught me and using it to become everything she never intended me to be. Free.